We like to believe our homes are safe. They are our sanctuaries, places where we can close the door and shut out the world. We feel secure within these four walls. We believe we are alone. But sometimes that feeling of safety is just an illusion. Sometimes, even when we think we are alone, we are not. Someone or something is watching, waiting, and we have no idea they are even there. Dark corners and hidden spaces. Technology has given those shadows a new way to see. Hidden cameras are small. They are easy to hide. A clock, a smoke detector, a teddy bear. Silent observers recording our most private moments. We live our lives unaware. We think our secrets are our own. These tiny, unblinking eyes see everything. They collect our lives piece by piece, turning homes from havens into stages. We are the unknowing actors. The feeling of being watched is an ancient fear. The tales you are about to hear are true. Our first story begins in a quiet, unassuming corner of South Carolina. For the Girardi family, the sprawling two-story house was more than just a building. It was the physical manifestation of a dream. A fresh start far from the city's noise. It had character, they said. Good bones. They pictured their children growing up within its walls, their laughter echoing through the halls. It was supposed to be their forever home, a sanctuary. But old houses have secrets, and this one, with its long, shadowed past, held its secrets closer than most. At first, the disturbances were easy to dismiss, the typical groans and sighs of an old structure settling, but soon, the sounds grew more distinct. A faint, rhythmic scratching from within the walls of the master bedroom, always starting just after midnight. They told themselves it was mice, a branch against the siding, anything but what it sounded like. Fingernails on drywall, keys left on the kitchen counter would appear on the mantelpiece. A child's toy, carefully put away, would be found in the center of the living room floor. Doors they were certain they had locked at night would be found slightly ajar in the morning. A silent invitation to the unseen. The feeling was pervasive, a heavy blanket of unease that smothered the home's initial warmth. It was a cold spot in a sunny room, the prickling on the back of your neck that says you are not alone. The children were the first to give it a voice. They spoke of a shadow man who darted just out of sight. They complained of someone talking to them from the vents in their bedrooms at night. Soft, hushed words they couldn't quite make out. Publicly, the parents put on a brave face, blaming overactive imaginations. But privately, their own certainty was eroding. The cold dread they felt was no figment of a child's imagination. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a source of creeping terror. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. The mother, home alone, heard what sounded like a muffled cough from upstairs. She called out, thinking her husband had come home early. Silence. That night, they bought a small security camera. They weren't sure what they were looking for. Mostly, they just hoped to prove themselves wrong, to capture hours of uneventful footage that would put their minds at ease. The next morning, with a nervous energy hanging between them, they sat down and began to review the footage. Hour after hour of silent, static video played out. The living room was still, bathed in the eerie green glow of the camera's night vision. They began to relax, a sense of foolishness creeping in, and then they stopped. They rewound and played it again. In the corner of the frame on a large air conditioning vent near the ceiling, something was wrong. One of the screws was different. It wasn't a vibration. It wasn't a trick of the light. On the time-lapsed recording, they watched in stunned silence as the screw began to rotate, counterclockwise. The movement was slow, patient, and undeniably deliberate. With a final tiny turn, the screw dropped from its housing, falling silently onto the carpet below. The family held their breath, eyes glued to the screen. The empty screw hole was a dark, unblinking eye. For a full 10 minutes on the recording, nothing happened. And then, from the blackness of the vent, 2 fingers emerged. Then a whole hand. It was pale and slender. It moved slowly, blindly, patting the wall around the vent opening before reaching down, searching the floor. It was looking for the screw. After a moment, the hand paused, then retreated, pulling back into the suffocating darkness as if it had never been there. The blood drained from their faces. This wasn't paranormal. It was something infinitely worse. The scratching, the whispers, the moving objects. It wasn't a spirit. It was a person. A living, breathing person, hidden just out of sight. The very walls that were meant to protect them were harboring a monster. Shaking, they dialed 911. When the police arrived, they were skeptical until they were shown the footage. A search of the house began. It ended in the attic. Tucked away in a cramped, forgotten corner, they found it. A small, insulated nest. There was a sleeping bag, a collection of empty food wrappers, the family's food, and a pile of books. And there were small holes drilled into the floor, allowing a direct view into the bedrooms below. Hiding behind a false wall was the man himself. He had been living in the house for weeks before they even moved in, using a hidden crawl space accessible only from the outside. He was the source of every bump in the night, every misplaced object, every terrifying whisper. He had been their silent, unseen roommate, the eyes they always felt but could never, ever see. Leaving your child with someone is an act of profound trust. You hand over the keys to your home, and with them, the safety of the person you love most. In the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, one couple was about to learn that the quiet anxieties that flicker in your mind are not always just anxieties. They can be warnings. Chris and Whitney hired a sitter who seemed perfectly qualified, but soon, their once bright daughter became quiet and withdrawn. She started having nightmares, clinging to her parents with a new desperation. Even more unsettling was the change in the family's gentle Labrador. The dog began to growl whenever the babysitter arrived, positioning itself between the woman and the child like a sentinel. A deep unease grew. Chris and Whitney couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The thought of placing a hidden camera felt like a violation, but the instinct to protect their child was stronger. They purchased a camera disguised as a USB phone charger and plugged it in. They told themselves it was for peace of mind, secretly praying the footage would prove their fears were just an overactive imagination. That night, they sat down at their laptop. The footage showed her yelling at the little girl for a minor spill. The child flinched and began to cry. Then, the sitter grabbed the child by the arm and violently dragged her from the couch. They kept watching. The camera captured the sitter trying to force-feed the child, shoving a spoon into her mouth as she cried. And then, the dog. The loyal Labrador trotted over, trying to intervene. The sitter responded with a vicious kick. In that moment, everything clicked. The dog wasn't being aggressive, it was being protective. It had seen what the parents couldn't and had been trying to warn them. Its instincts had been right all along. Rage and heartbreak warred within them. They immediately contacted the police. The babysitter was promptly arrested and charged with child abuse and animal cruelty. Justice was served, but the damage was done. The emotional scars for both the child and her parents ran deep. The sense of safety in their own home had been shattered. The hidden camera, an object of modern paranoia, became their salvation. It was a silent witness that spoke the truth. The unseen eye acted as a guardian, but it forces us to wonder, what happens in the rooms where there is no camera? What secrets unfold behind closed doors, leaving only behavioral changes and a loyal dog's growl as the sole, desperate clues? Our final story takes us to a time before the silent digital eyes of hidden cameras, to an era when a secret could be kept by nothing more than a locked door and a quiet street. We're in Denver, Colorado, in the autumn of 1941. The world was on the brink of war, but on a quiet residential street, a more intimate horror was about to unfold. Here lived Philip Peters, an elderly and solitary man. Known to his neighbors as a recluse, he kept to himself, his life a quiet routine within the four walls of his home. This isolation, which he seemed to prefer, would become a central, baffling element of his demise. One morning, a neighbor, concerned after not seeing Peters for several days, called the police. They found him on his living room floor. At first glance, it might have been a tragic accident, a fall, but the coroner saw something else. The bruises and cuts on his body told a different story, one of violence. Yet the scene was pristine, nothing was stolen, every door and window was securely locked from the inside. The police were faced with an impossible puzzle. Philip Peters had been killed in a struggle, but his attacker had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of their entry or exit. It was a perfect locked room mystery. With no leads, the investigation stalled, the case went cold, and Philip Peters' house sat silent and empty, a dark monument on a quiet street. Months passed. New tenants, a married couple, moved in, hoping for a quiet life. But their peace was soon shattered. They reported strange, unsettling noises from upstairs, faint footsteps in the dead of night, a dry, hacking cough that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Terrified, they called the police. Officers swept the house from top to bottom, their flashlight beams cutting through the dusty air. They found nothing. No vagrant, no animal, no explanation. The couple fled, and the house was empty once more. Now the whispers began. Neighbors would see lights flicker in the vacant windows, or the faint sway of a curtain when there was no breeze. The story of the ghost of Philip Peters took root, becoming a chilling piece of local folklore. The truth, however, was far more terrestrial and infinitely more disturbing than any ghost story. Nearly a year after Peter's death, two patrolmen were passing the house late one night. They were responding to yet another call from a nervous neighbor about a light in an upstairs window. Weary, but diligent, they decided to conduct one more search. This time, they were meticulous. In an upstairs bedroom closet, one officer noticed something he'd missed before: a small square panel in the ceiling, barely larger than a dinner plate. It was a tiny access door to a crawl space. He stood on a chair, his partner holding a flashlight. As he pushed the panel aside, the beam of light shot into the darkness above. And there, dangling just inches from his face, were two emaciated, skeletal legs. The ghost was a man. His name was Theodore Coneys, a sickly, destitute man in his late 50s who had been reported missing months earlier. He was so frail he offered no resistance. At the station, the whole horrifying story came out. Coneys, who had known Peters in passing years before, was homeless and desperate. He had broken into the house simply to find a place to sleep and something to eat. He thought the house was empty, but Peters was home. The elderly man discovered him, and a struggle ensued. In the chaos, Peters fell, struck his head, and died. Coneys hadn't intended to kill him, but now he was a murderer. Overcome with panic, Coneys saw the small attic opening and scrambled inside, pulling the cover over him. And there he stayed. For 9 agonizing months he lived in that cramped, dark space, a self-imposed prison just feet above where the new tenants slept. He was the phantom, his coughs and movements the source of the haunting. At night, when the house was still, he would creep down, a ghost in his own nightmare, to scavenge for scraps of food and sips of water from the sink. He became known as the Denver Spider-Man. Theodore Coneys wasn't discovered by a hidden camera. He was found by pure chance. But his story is a chilling analog for the very fears that modern surveillance taps into. It proves that our homes, our sanctuaries, are not as impenetrable as we believe. The locks on our doors can be bypassed. And sometimes, the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural spirits or shadowy figures on a screen. They are ordinary, desperate people, hiding in the dark, just out of sight.